Well, hi, everybody. Thank you for coming. We are here to talk about states leading the way on the Every Student Succeeds Act. My name is Caitlin Emma. I'm an education reporter for Politico. Quick plug for Politico. If you don't subscribe to our morning education newsletter, please do. We try to give you a comprehensive view of what's going on in federal policy and politics when it comes to education every single day. So that's my plug. But, woo. So to start with our esteemed panelists, immediately to my left, we have Carrie Wright, who's the superintendent of the state of Mississippi. We have Hansel Kang, who's the DC superintendent, and not Mayor Ras Baraka, as you heard. We have Alice Peisch, who's a state representative from Massachusetts, and on the far end, we have John White, who's the superintendent of Louisiana. So I wanted to sort of start by talking about some recent news. So we all know that the Every Student Succeeds Act returned a lot of local authority and decision-making and flexibility to states. And federal officials have approved most of these plans. We're sort of in the thick of implementation here. But as I'm sure everybody in this room is aware, 4th and 8th grade math and reading scores on the nation's report card came out earlier this week, and the results were, frankly, really disappointing for some. It appears that achievement gaps, aren't budging, and there's sort of a yawning gap between the performance of low-performing students and high-performing students. So I wanted to really start with anybody here and see if you can talk about, on a high level, how your state plan begins to, tackle this problem of inequity and these other problems that, don't seem to be budging when it comes to the U.S. education system. How does your plan begin to tackle that?
Do you want to take that first?
Anybody want to start? John?
Sure. Well, good afternoon. Great to be here and great to see many familiar faces and great to be with such a wonderful group of panelists. I think that the issue of how we solve achievement gaps and how we start moving the needle on the cognitive gains in the NAEP or frankly any other measure has to start with, do we know what we want out of good schools? Be they public schools, traditional, be they charter public schools, be they non-public schools. And I think if there's one great indictment of our whole education reform conversation about the whole ESSA discussion, I would say, it's that we want to talk a lot about high standards and we want to talk a lot about choice, and I'm, Lord knows, all for those things. But we don't talk a lot about the essential elements that the most highly successful countries around the world have embodied in their school systems. And first and foremost, that is a high-quality curriculum, and it's a teacher who's prepared to teach that curriculum. Those are the two essential elements. And whatever school you have, no matter whatever population it serves, if you don't have those things, it's not going to work. And our plan starts there. And of course, we have elements about the measures and the standards and the letter grades and all of those things and the things that are so often talked about. But it has to start, school improvement has to start with assuring that those two things exist. And it's going to look differently in different places. In New Orleans, we have a strategy that is exclusive to charter schools and non-public schools. In Baton Rouge, another large metropolitan area, we have a charter school strategy. But in Bunkie, Louisiana, you could do all the charter school authorizing you want. It's unlikely that in every small community in Louisiana, you're going to create a radically different circumstance by creating new institutions. And so you have to ask, with where you are in that place and time, are you assured that the best people possible are in charge of the school, they're prepared to do it, the best people possible in front of kids, they're prepared to do it, and at the most essential element, there's a curriculum that actually teaches teachers to teach the skills that we want our schools to imbue our kids with. And that's the foundation of our ESSA plan.
I want to follow up with that, with John's comments, because one of the things that we discovered, and to John's point about some of the rural areas that we have, we did not have enough the ability really to get out and help a lot of these teachers. And I'm a firm believer that one of the speakers earlier this morning said every teacher comes in believing that they want to do the very best that they can. And some teachers just have a bigger capacity to do that than others. So one of the things that we did, we partnered with Mississippi State, actually University of Mississippi, I'm sorry, we didn't have enough positions in the department, but we had the funds to go out and hire what we call professional development coordinators. And this is a way for us to provide on-demand professional development to any district in our state. And the idea is, with a superintendent or a principal that's looked at their data and says, our teachers are struggling with 5th grade math, then we can send a professional development coordinator to meet right with that principal or that superintendent and design their PD with them and then implement that with them. So we're able to really hone in on individual school and individual district needs. And we really have focused a lot on our lowest performing schools. And we are seeing results because of that. We put literacy coaches, that's another part of our plan. And we started with our lowest performing schools, and we're seeing tremendous gains by putting our literacy coaches there. Even our board decided that they wanted more of a focus on it. We had started out with 5 goals in our strategic plan, and then they added a 6th goal, and with a whole focus on low-performing schools and low-performing districts. So as a state, we've really taken that on and built that in to what we're doing and what we're doing with our strategic plan as well.
Superintendent King?
Yeah, I completely agree that thinking about the local context and what is most relevant and important in that local context is essential. And I think that's really the biggest freedom that ESSA provides states to really step back and think about what matters. And in the District of Columbia, not everyone always knows that we actually have more than 60 different local education agencies within our borders. We have DC Public Schools, our traditional local education agency, which serves just over half of our students. And then we have more than 60 different charter organizations that collectively serve just under half of our students. And so one of the biggest opportunities for us under ESSA was to have a common accountability system that provided good, clear information in a summative way across all of our schools, DCPS and public charter schools. And we thought that that was incredibly important, first to give parents good information as they are making school choices or they're engaging in their child's school communities. And second, so that our schools really could learn from each other around the work that is going well. When I first got to DC, I had come here from Tennessee, and Tennessee is a big state. It would take us many hours to drive around and visit rural districts. And then I got to DC and would visit schools, and I would visit these schools that felt just as isolated as the rural districts I used to go out and see in Appalachia. They just were not having conversations with the principal down the street. They were asking me, what curricular choices do you think I should be making? And I was saying, we really need a better way. We need a better way to provide good, clear information to everybody, and for the state education agency, my office, to provide stronger networks of support to bring principals and teachers together to learn from each other. But the common basis for that has to be a clear way to measure and to provide information about all of our schools.
Representative Peisch?
So I agree with what's already been said here, and I think in Massachusetts, as many of you know, we, as a state, we have been doing quite well for a number of years. I think part of that is because we have been consistent in sticking with the reforms that were adopted 25 years ago. But we have, like many other places, persistent achievement gaps, and that continues to be the case and was evident in the recent results. Our plan is really, I think, trying to amp up what we're doing about that. We're really trying to focus on identifying the subgroups that are low performing and providing interventions as quickly as possible. We do know that good teachers matter, and so there's a plan to really identify the level of experience in the teachers that are teaching those groups and getting the districts to focus on getting good teachers in to those classrooms, as well as providing a good leadership. We are hoping to get more of our highly effective principals who have had success in turning around schools to share their practices or to be transferred into those schools and districts that are in great need of improvement.
So the Every Student Succeeds Act, as we're, again, all well aware, grants new authority to states and districts and new flexibility, and that can look like a number of different things. I think what probably has gotten the most attention, at least from the media, is sort of new indicators in terms of measuring schools. But there's a lot that can be built in there when it comes to interventions for low-performing schools, or other pilot programs that states and districts can take advantage of. So, Carrie, can you talk about how Mississippi's plan is seizing new flexibility under the law? What does that look like in your specific state?
Well, one of the things, our department is rather small compared to what you would imagine for a larger state. And one of the things that we realized is that we wanted to be able to provide a tiered approach to how we were providing support to our schools. So one of the things that we are going to be doing is really providing a face-to-face coaching with all of our schools that are underperforming. And we felt that this was going to be important to have somebody actually on the site on a regular basis, helping principals and helping teachers in this process. We've also moved to provide then more virtual support to those schools that kind of like the next tier down, so that and regular meetings. We have those meetings throughout the state as well. But we've gone to another model as well. We worked with our legislature. We had been using conservators when the state had to go in and take over a district. We've been placing conservators in there to basically get them cleared of their accreditation violations, but we weren't seeing any needle change on school improvement. So with the legislature, we changed the whole model to one of a district of transformation for those low-performing districts if we have to take them over. And instead of putting a conservator in, we're going to put a superintendent in. And the superintendent then will go in with an instructional focus rather than just a clearing of an accreditation focus. But they have to be there for at least 5 years of a C or higher rating. So that's going to provide a lot more continuity in a lot of the lowest performing schools or districts that we've had to get involved in. That's been a big piece of it as well. Our accountability model also places a greater emphasis on the growth of the lowest 25%. We've seen a lot of progress, particularly under our lowest performing schools, and we have moved a lot of those F-rated schools and F-rated districts into D and C categories because they've been really focusing on who are our lowest performers in ELA and who are our 25% of our lowest performers in math. So our accountability model, we feel, is really addressing this as well.
John, I know the state of Louisiana applied for a new pilot program created by the law that will allow the state to sort of experiment with more innovative assessments. And Louisiana was one of just a few states, in addition to New Hampshire and Puerto Rico, that applied for this. Can you talk about what that will look like?
Sure. I do want to just first address the issue of flexibility in ESSA, because we say, a lot flexibility is so good, innovation is so good. Flexibility and innovation are only good if you're thoughtful like Carrie is about how you want to use that power. I do have concerns that flexibility and innovation in a lot of places can end up just meaning a bunch of mush and nothingness. However, No Child Left Behind, and by the way, all of us in states, I believe, owe Secretary Page, who I know is here, and Secretary Spellings, and President Bush an extraordinary debt of gratitude for the framework that No Child Left Behind gave to states. But it's fair to say that, a dozen years in, anytime you do anything across 50 different states that look as different even as the ones that are up here, much less the big ones, you're going to create incoherence. And I think that as we've gone through this ESSA process, that word of coherence is what has resonated with me. There are not effective education systems around the world that are as incoherent as the American system, period, full stop. And it is still true today that parents and teachers come to work every day with a set of standards, curriculum, formative assessments, summative assessments, and teacher training, none of which speak to one another. And that is an extraordinary problem. I mean, it's one thing to do it in one school, but we've got 1,500 schools. Having a good system that's producing high levels of learning across thousands and tens of thousands of schools requires some level of coherence, that a teacher can know that when he has a standard, he's teaching a curriculum that embodies that standard, and he's prepared to teach both in a way that'll be measured at the end of the year. Our assessment is just the promise that what's actually taught in a curriculum will end up being measured by the learning. And it happens to be over the course of the year. It happens to be that it's going to be administered several times over the course of the year in small doses. It happens to be that it takes social studies, real knowledge in history, geography, and marries it with English, real knowledge of literature and convention. But really what's underneath it is the simple idea that what we teach in our curricula should actually be measured. The knowledge in our curriculum should actually be measured by the knowledge and assessments, because what we have, in spite of all of the good that the assessment regime that NCLB put in place, and it did do an extraordinary amount of good, what we still have is a set of humanities classrooms where teachers are teaching to the test in the worst kind of way rather than the best kind of way. Even good teachers, even myself, we were often teaching, find the main idea, find evidence for this, summarize this. When any one of us on this stage or in this audience reads a book, we don't sit around hunting and pecking for a main idea. And we're not helping our kids read by not actually helping them to learn the knowledge that's in the curriculum that we should aspire for them to have. And that's what our pilot's all about.
What about in DC or Massachusetts? Are there any sort of examples that you can point to in terms of using flexibility under this new law that won't, I guess, turn into mush?
Well, I would hope that what we do is not ultimately turned into mush.
There's no mush.
Although I think I think I share your concerns about across the country there are places where I think leaving everything to this. I think we heard from the student earlier today about the gross inequity across the country in terms of preparation, so that when you are fortunate enough to get to a university, if you have not had strong preparation, you can't take advantage of all there is to offer. And I think that does speak to the issue that in some places it's being done well, in some places it's not. And if we don't, as a country, hold everyone to the standard of educating their children, I think we will be very poorly served ultimately. But to answer your question, in Massachusetts, what we are taking advantage of in terms of the flexibility piece is in our accountability system. We're introducing a comparison not just across the board, but within similarly situated districts. Because one of the criticisms that I think was well-founded that we've heard over time is it fair that the performance of students in the districts that I represent, that are very well resourced, that come from very well educated homes, are compared to students in districts where the reverse is the case. So what we are doing is instituting a system that will continue to have some objective accountability, but also look at how did this district or this school perform relative to similarly situated schools and districts. And I think that is recognizing the range of challenges that different schools and teachers and leaders face.
Superintendent King?
Yeah, I'll just add that I think with any of these tough questions, there are inherent tensions that we and our stakeholders have to grapple with. The tension between recognizing the unique, diverse approaches that schools can take to serving their actual students and families, and the need to have some kind of coherence, right? And so, within DC, again, with more than 60 different charter organizations, more than 100 different public charter schools, and then within DCPS as well, there are often many different approaches that schools want to take, and schools are saying, my school model is different. It is different from this school for this reason, and yet at the same time needing to find some way to also bring some commonality and some coherence, to John's point, to the way that we are thinking about schools and looking at schools without trying to impinge on the innovation and autonomy that has driven so much of DC's progress over the last 10 years. So I just say that to say I don't think there are easy answers here. I think there are tensions to navigate within any of these things.
Also on DC, I'm curious, I'd love to hear you talk a little bit more about, goal setting there. I know that we talked a long time ago about sort of why, the goals that DC set for its students, why those are realistic. And I mean, since we last spoke, I'd love to hear you talk about that, but, the system-wide audit of sort of the graduation rate issue here in DC and the chronic absenteeism issue here in DC. I mean, how does that now sort of fit in with the goals that the district has set, and can you sort of talk about that path forward?
Sure. So we have an issue with chronic absenteeism in DC. We need to support more of our students in attending school every day. And there's a lot of complexity to that issue, but there's a lot more that we need to do. This is actually one of the key measures we built into our accountability system long before sort of the recent news. There's a specific measure around addressing chronic absenteeism. It's in our school environment bucket. I think it's actually weighted the heaviest of any of those measures. And it's a best of measure. So we look at both the rate of students attending school, the percent of students who are present for 90% or more of the school year. We also look at the school's growth in that measure. So how much have they improved in that measure from the previous year? And then we give schools the credit for whichever of those two that they do the best on. So we had already recognized that this was a significant issue, one that we certainly needed to address, and one where even schools that have really high rates of chronic absenteeism right now that have a significant issue, there are some of those schools that are making real progress in addressing that issue, and we wanted to incent and recognize those schools and learn from what they're doing. The other thing I would say on another measure that we put in place was we included an alternate graduation rate in addition to the 4-year adjusted cohort graduation rate. And that was meant to recognize and incent schools who, for all of the students they are graduating, no matter how long it took. So even if it took 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, even if the student left and came back to school, recognizing every single student that that school supports in graduating, because we want schools to do what's in the best interests of students. Yes, we think 4-year ACGR is important. We will continue to measure and report it, but we also want to include this alternate rate. And so I think the goal of an accountability system should be to recognize the good work that schools are doing while still providing some of that common information, and trying as much as possible not to create the disincentives that lead to potential bad action.
What about, I'd love to hear from the other panelists about, different approaches. If you want to talk about goal setting, we can talk about that. But I'm also curious about sort of different approaches to accountability. There's been a lot of discussion over, A through F, 1 through 5 stars, should we do something else, transparency. I think, if I'm right, both Carrie and John in your states are using sort of like an A through F grading scale. I mean, why is that appropriate for your state? Why do you think that's important? And I don't know if you have thoughts on other approaches and why that wouldn't, work in your state. I'd love to hear about it.
Well, go ahead,
Carrie.
There you go. We have a lot of confidence in our A through F system, and it's something that the public understands, it's something teachers understand, it's something parents understand. But I think the purpose to me of an accountability system is to obtain the behaviors, if you will, that you're trying to use to improve student outcomes. And I say that by saying we've added other components to our model. It's not just around English language arts and mathematics. We do have the component about the growth of the lowest 24% in English language arts and mathematics. But we've also added an acceleration component, which looks at the participation and performance of students that are in advanced placement, IB, Cambridge, dual credit. We've also added a college and career readiness component. We administer ACT to all of our 11th graders, and then we use that information then to back map when we're looking at strengths and weaknesses. So we are now, because of that, we have nearly doubled the number of children that are participating as well as their performance of children that are taking advanced placement classes, and that has been over a period of 4 years. So we're seeing, I don't think there was a high enough expectation. I think when I first got to Mississippi, we had some of our high schools that weren't offering any advanced placement. And I feel very strongly that if you build it, they will come, and that's exactly what's happened. And we're very proud also of the fact that not only are scores getting higher, but the percentage of children scoring 3 or higher has also significantly increased to 19.8% and 28% with minorities. So we're really trying to incentivize schools to be offering a wide range of things. We've got a huge focus on literacy. We've got a 3rd grade passing into Promotion Act, if you will, into 4th grade. And that's really driven our K-3 literacy to a great extent, as well as our professional development. So I think, to me, an accountability model is one that needs to be transparent, one that needs to be understood, but it also one that needs to drive behaviors that are going to provide children with a greater outcome, and one that is more equitable, so that everybody's expected. Mm-hmm.
I agree with Carrie on the faith that we have in the letter grade system. I would say a couple things. I think that in the popular dialogue, there's been this fetishizing of things like letter grades that, frankly, Florida was doing more than a decade ago. New York City, when I was in New York City, we were doing that in 2007. So, that to me is old news in the education media and in the policy universe. I think the bigger problems are there are at least 4 major failings in what is available to states, I think, today. And I'm concerned by that states actually haven't done enough experimentation and creative work when it comes to accountability. The first is that there is no means of assuring today, less than there was even 5 years ago, and really Hunsul has done just amazing work on this across the country, but of assuring that when you say a kid is proficient, right, she's proficient. And how did we lose sight of that? Mm-hmm. We lost sight of it because we all went through, whatever side of it you were on, we all went through this Common Core deal, and we lost sight of the ball that proficiency should be proficiency, and there shouldn't be that much deviation from one state to the next. Right. So that's a problem. Secondly, NCLB didn't intentionally create this, ESSA didn't intentionally create this, but it remains a serious flaw in public policy, which is everybody loves pre-K, 4 and 5-year-olds. Everybody loves 3 through 8 accountability and high school grad rates and everything. But what happened to K through 2?
Yeah.
I mean, hello, this is a serious problem. And then we wonder why we struggle with literacy in 4th grade. It's, largely due to the fact that we do not have an accountability framework that drives good practice, good curriculum, and the best teachers to be placed in what may be the most critical grades. Third, we create very little incentive in our system to exit and transition kids effectively into post-secondary learning. And fourth, we have narrowed the curriculum. And that's fine. But if all you're holding kids accountable for is math and reading, you're forgetting, and maybe science, you're forgetting about the subjects like history that actually help kids learn how to read, and you're forgetting about all the other reasons that as parents we send our kids to school. And this is not a failure of states. It's only partially a failure of states. It's largely a failure of the measurement, the research, the policy universe to equip states with the opportunity to take up these measures. And states haven't been, frankly, demanding it well enough either. But it's a serious issue. If we don't solve these problems, we're not getting the most out of our accountability systems. Our accountability systems aren't evolving, and they need to evolve.
So since we are talking about states leading, we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the federal government. Sort of from the outset, I think we all sort of expected this administration to not be, overly critical of state education plans. We're all a little bit unsure about what this, review and approval process is going to look like. And, so far we've seen, I think 37 states, DC and Puerto Rico have been approved. And, but we had Secretary DeVos a few weeks ago gave a speech to the Council of Chief State School Officers and said that these plans are not ambitious. And it was I was there, I was in the room, it was a little uncomfortable. She really went after these state plans and sort of said, you could be doing a lot more, why aren't you doing a lot more? It was a tough speech. So I'd like to just hear from really anybody. I mean, what did you think about the Secretary's message? I mean, do you recognize that that's a problem, or are there things that she isn't seeing when she's talking about these plans?
So I was there too.
Yes.
As the president of CCSSO, sitting on the front row. So I think that, in my opinion, I don't think that the template that we were asked to fill out, at least I'm speaking for myself as a state chief, was ever intended to show all that we are doing as a state for children. My analogy that I used with a reporter that interviewed me right after that was, if you look at the ESSA template, what we sent in that got approved, I said, you need to think of it like a skeleton. And then you need to think of all the work that states do as the meat and muscle that goes onto the skeleton. Because there is so much that is not in that template, because it was designed basically to see, are you meeting all of these kinds of cursory kinds of requirements. But when I think about all that we are doing that's beyond that, under John's leadership, he started a whole initiative around high-quality instructional materials. And that then spawned an initiative that CCSSO is involved with. And John's done amazing work with this. And the whole idea is to build a teacher's capacity to recognize that all the materials that they're using, are they of high quality? Are they aligned to the standards? Is it the best that you could be providing children? Because any vendor is going to come in, having been a principal for a number of years, and tell you, absolutely my materials are aligned to your standards, and absolutely they're of high quality. But what we wanted to do after working with John's team is to teach our teachers, you need to be the judge of when you're getting ready to use that. So we did not lift up, that's an example of high quality instructional materials initiative. When I think about what we're doing around the workforce development, that wasn't spelled out in the depth that we've been doing. We've been meeting with all businesses around the state. We divided the state into 6 regions, and my department has been going out and meeting with the local businesses and saying, what is it that you're looking for by the time the children walk the stage in your area? And what kind of employment are you looking for? for, and then we come back and try to design that career pathway to meet the needs of businesses around our state. That wasn't necessarily spelled out. We've upgraded our diploma options. Now children can not only get a standard diploma, but they can get an option, an endorsement on top of that, either in CTE or an academic endorsement or a distinguished endorsement, and lifted the expectations for children around the state. So I can go on and on. There's other examples I could use, but I don't think that anybody that picks up anybody's ESSA plan, I would hope that nobody is looking at it saying that is the sum total of what is taking place in that state, because it simply is not.
I'd love to hear from either of you three. I mean, what might we not be seeing when we're looking at state ESSA plans, which, aren't exciting reading anyway. So what?
So I think that I agree about the sort of skeletal nature of the plan and what is submitted. And when I was preparing for this panel, I went to the department to get information on the Massachusetts plan, with which I was generally familiar. And the volume of information I got about each element of that plan and all of the things that were being done in order to implement it was quite extraordinary. So I think on the one hand, that was probably not a fair statement. On the other hand, I think that if the secretary thinks that states aren't doing enough, then maybe she shouldn't, if she thought the plans weren't sufficiently ambitious, maybe she should not have approved them. It seems to me you can't have it both ways.
Either of you guys? Or what do you think about this idea that, she might be sending mixed messaging?
I guess I have the option to say I wasn't there. It turns out that was a wise decision. But I'll say this, taking her out of it and taking the chief state school officers out of it, because really the personalities don't matter very much. Is it a reasonable thing to say that the education system is not as full of new ideas as it used to be? Absolutely. Is it not as coherent and as ambitious as it needs to be? Absolutely. So taking us out of it and taking her out of it, then that seems like a pretty reasonable thing to say. And if you need evidence of it, ask yourself in your state where public education ranks among the issues that the gubernatorial candidates this fall are actually running on versus where it ranks in the minds of the people who vote for those people. It ranks, I'm sure, at least in my state, quite high. Do I think it'll be a leading agenda item in the elections to come? Probably not in most places. I feel politicians, I find them running from education relative to where we were a decade ago, where they were running toward K-12 education. And I think that says something about us as education leaders, and that we are not generating new stuff that people are excited about. And if that's what the secretary was trying to convey, then whether she said it well or not, then I think that's not a bad response.
Do you have any thoughts, Superintendent King?
No, I would just add, I think John alluded to this before. I think there is something telling about lots of education leaders at this moment in time looking to people who spent their careers in K-12 education, now looking to the promise of workforce development and what happens after high school, looking to, in DC, we have the fortune of having invested heavily in early childhood, not just with the universal pre-K 3 and 4, but also with our infants and toddlers. But it just means we're getting younger and younger and younger, and we do need to. It's hugely important, and it's work that I'm excited for my office to continue to lead and support. But it is striking to see the people who've spent their careers in the core of K-12 really start to look at the other ends of the age spectrum, and we can't lose sight of the critical work and the learning that happens. I think, in DC, we're certainly aware of the incredible impacts that trauma and poverty have on our students, and there's so much that needs to happen in the other sectors of government and other public services and other nonprofit services, but at the same time, we can't lose sight of the work that we do in schools matters, and we have to keep getting better at it, and we have to think about the best ways to do that.
So certainly, to sort of keep talking about this federal role. I mean, we're coming off an era under the Obama administration where there was a lot of discussion about this, and is the federal role an oversized one? And then, the Every Student Succeeds Act passed in direct response to a lot of what the Obama administration did. But Secretary DeVos's role doesn't stop at approving these state plans. Obviously, these plans have to be implemented, and she's going to have an important oversight and monitoring role going forward. So I'm curious, in the last discussion, it was interesting to sort of hear Senator Alexander and Senator Murray sort of go back and forth on this. What do you, as state leaders, what do you see the federal government's role being now, moving forward under this law? Anybody wants to field that?
Well, they're playing an oversight role. A number of us have testified already in front of oversight committees about the implementation of ESSA. There will be a departmental review process, and already our assessments are under peer review. They're doing the same things within that box that they did previously within a different box. They're playing their rightful role. Look, let's not overstate the role of the federal government in K-12 education beyond creating rules of the game. And the rules of the game have changed. Therefore, the bureaucrats have to change a little bit too, just as would be the case at the state. But their role is to stay within that lane. And really, it's up to the states. And it's not just up to the states, but it's up to Carrie and her leadership at CCSSO collaborating with states. It's up to the business community, the chambers and others, collaborating and making sure that where there are needed connections across state lines, those things happen. Now, I have to say that under administration that I think is perceived to be more involved in states' business in the previous administration, certainly under a law, NCLB, and Race to the Top ultimately, that was more brought states into the federal orbit. We states didn't succeed at unifying our accountability systems. We created large consortia that tried to at least bring us into one common definition of excellence, and we didn't do that. Not anyone's in particular fault, but it shows you how hard it is in a system that is so splintered to try to do things that unify us in principle. But it hasn't historically been the role of the federal government to do that. It's not in our constitutional framework, the federal government, that should do that. So let's not needlessly, sort of go back and forth about whether or not the federal government should do that when it's just not their job. It is our responsibility as states where there are things that must be done collaboratively in order to maintain a high standard, to do so collaboratively. And that's really who I think you should be asking the question about oversight and standards of.
I think it's an organization. CCSSO has really welcomed the responsibility of states leading in this area. I think the state chiefs, when we do get together, we do collaborate, are excited about the opportunity to really to lead in this area. And to John's point, that's not to say that the federal government doesn't have a role, but I think that not only as a state, but even our local entities, down in our districts, are welcoming the responsibilities of decision making and the implementation. Because I think, I'll speak for Mississippi. I think the gains that we're seeing, people are very excited about, and they see that when we even implemented ESSA or developed ESSA, it was not a brand new plan. We used ESSA's opportunity to strengthen our own strategic plan because we saw our strategic plan as a state working. And so we did not want to throw the baby out with the bathwater because we had strategies that we knew were working. And so that's not something that we wanted, necessarily somebody yang or naying on, because we saw the evidence of our hard work. But I think that education is the state's most important responsibility, and as a state chief, I take that on very seriously. It's something that I wake up in the wee hours of the morning thinking about, because I feel like this is an opportunity that we have now to really make a difference in the lives of all children, regardless of where they live, regardless of their zip code, regardless of all the above. And when we've got the ability to do that and lead district leaders in that work, I think that's a really powerful place to be.
Superintendent Game?
I don't think I have much to add. I appreciated Senator Alexander's distinction between thinking about education as an issue of national importance, but not necessarily one where there's an outsized federal role. And I thought that was a helpful and clarifying distinction. And I agree that there is a lot that we can and need to continue to do as state leaders to work with each other. I think our organizations, our districts, our teachers, they're all eager for us to find ways to work together. And especially in DC, it's been so helpful to work with, Maryland as a neighboring state and other states around the country around the common standard of excellence we want to hold our students to. And I think for all of the battles that have gone into that work, I think the fundamental thing that brought states to that work in the first place, and that continues on, is this idea that we were sending off our students to post-secondary education and they weren't ready, and that was not okay. That we needed to be clear about what that bar was to be ready and to work backwards from there to say then what needs to happen in high school and middle school and in elementary school. But it turns out that as we've learned digging into that work, that it's really hard. There's a lot of operational barriers in the way in addition to political barriers when it comes to states working together. And so it takes a real commitment not only to the idea of it, but to seeing through the implementation. And it's really interesting to see all the informal and formal ways that states are coming together to try and do things together, but it takes a lot. It's not just in education that we have a really fragmented system. Just state lines in general are hard to cross in the work that we try to do together.
Do you have any thoughts?
I do. I think that's very challenging. So on the one hand, it's absolutely true that the education is the responsibility of the states. Our constitutions do require that we provide a good education to all of our students. What concerns me is that the degree to which there is not uniform opportunities available across the country. Different states offer, and different local districts have different qualities. And if you're a kid in one of those places that isn't getting the best opportunity, and it is the only way for you to improve yourself and be able to become an active and participating citizen, I think the federal government should be doing something to ensure that across the board, every kid does have that opportunity. How you do that is very challenging. I think that providing resources is one way, because I think if you look across the country, you'll see that, no surprise, in most of the places where we do have real challenges in delivering high-quality public education to everyone, we do not have much in the way of resources. I come from a state that is very well resourced, so it's easy for me to be critical of what others may or may not be doing. The other thing that I think is a real challenge that John alluded to is I've been part of a group of state legislators that's been studying high-performing international systems, and the coherence is striking in those countries. And there's a couple of things that I think we don't do, as far as I know, anywhere in the country that would make a big difference, and that is having a teacher career ladder, ensuring that all teachers, in order to advance, do spend time in districts or schools that have students that are more at risk and are more challenging. There's a very rigorous preparation across the board. And these are areas that I think it would be very helpful for us to have some kind of program by which we can support the implementation of these kinds of changes within the states.
Well, we're running out of time, so I want to make sure that we are getting to audience questions if there are any. Does anybody have a question for any of these folks over here?
Hi, Darlene Opfer from the RAND Corporation. You've all mentioned or alluded to the importance of having well-prepared teachers to meet the goals of your plan. What are you doing in your states around initial teacher preparation to make sure you're getting better, high-quality teachers in the classroom?
So one thing that we're doing in Mississippi is we're literally going back through and digging in a lot deeper into educator prep programs. and what exactly, are they providing in terms of what we need in terms of a teacher being ready day one. I was hearing from a lot of superintendents that teachers didn't know how to teach reading. And so that's one of the initiatives that we started, was a very in-depth PD around how do you teach the foundational skills of reading. But we began to think, why is that on us as a state when they should be coming in prepared for that? So the entire section of that department is going to be meeting with every single educator prep program and making sure, digging not just the, do you have it checked, but actually looking at the content of what teachers are learning. Because I think it's no fault of theirs that they've graduated from a university, they show up at a district and they don't know how to do something. And so it's really going to be more of a way to put the onus on our universities to do their job well, so that they can hit the ground running by the time they reach the districts.
Anybody else?
We've moved to a full-year residency. Every college undergraduate, one of 2 states in the country, every college resident is a full-time teacher for their senior year as undergraduates under the tutelage of a mentor educator who's a full-time one-to-one mentor. We have a competency-based curriculum that incorporates some of the things Carrie was talking about, but also accountability. The feds tried to regulate this and kind of swung and missed on that, and states weren't ready, I don't think, to do it themselves in many cases. And so we've created an accountability framework for all providers that is based on an on-site review, based on the effectiveness of alumni, but also based on where residents are placed. I think too often our colleges of education are able to secure placements in suburban communities and with middle-income students and classes that don't necessarily focus on students with disabilities. That has to change, and directing our colleges in that direction is essential.
Absolutely.
Do we have another question?
Yes, we have one other question from the audience. Could you describe the process of stakeholder engagement in developing the plans for the states?
I mentioned that a core of our plan has been around the need to get good information out to parents and families, and across all types of schools, public charter schools and traditional public schools. And so from the beginning, not only with the accountability system, but especially with the report card, which will be used, the school report cards, which will be the vehicle for accessing the accountability information as well as other key information about schools. We've really tried to have parent voice at the heart of that from the beginning. On my agency's homepage, ossi.dc.gov, you can see a scroller that's about building DC's report card. We've set that up in 3 phases of work. This past fall, we did a parent engagement around the content of the report card. What information do parents really want to see about their schools? Again, either as they're making school choices or engaging in their current school communities. And we heard from parents a lot of frustration around, I have to go to 5 different places to find this information that just seems really basic, or I can find it about my child's DCPS school, but I can't find it about their public charter school. And we wanted one common central place. And in the course of just a couple of months, we heard from almost 2,000 parents and families about the contents they wanted to see, worked closely with our State Board of Education and a number of other community-based organizations by putting together a toolkit that they could use with their existing parent networks to gather feedback and share it with us, and it shaped our proposal. We're now in the middle of phase 2. There's a survey available on our website. If you're a DC resident, please go and take it. It's around the design of the report card, so the data visualizations we offer, how information should be placed and organized, what's most important to see up top, and we're reaching back out. We've created another toolkit. We're reaching back out to those same parent networks to try and get that second phase of input. And then the third phase will be preparing for our launch starting this summer and fall, leading up to December 2018. We want parents to know that this information is coming, to think about it as they head into the next season of school choice and next season of enrollment or in their current school again. And we're really excited about this opportunity. We've heard some great feedback already from parents and family members. And it's also, I think, helping us bring good information to our schools and LEAs to say, this might not be what you want to hear, but your parents are clearly hungry for this information, and to think about how we really harness parent voice to drive improvement in DC.
I'm also curious how, in your states, you plan to keep stakeholder engagement going. I mean, I'm assuming it doesn't stop with the development of the plan. I mean, how does that continue in Mississippi?
we've got a couple of things that we're doing. One is we're going to now go back out. I want to echo everything that Hansel just said, because we did the same thing out into communities, holding meetings, one in the afternoon and one at night, so that we could get people, make sure that everybody could have a chance to come. But now we want to then go back out to those same groups, provide feedback. We're doing the same thing that Hansel's talking about with our report card. But we've also extended, I've got a superintendent's advisory group, we've got a principal's advisory group, I've got a teacher's advisory group that's grown, like 10 times over what it was. And so we've been trying to make sure that we're hearing those voices, and that's another reason we want to get back out into the communities, because that's where we really, some of the things they said surprised us, like what you would expect them to want in their report card. They was like, no, we don't care about that. Like, here's what we want to know. And so we want to, now that we've kind of got a little bit of a design, to go back out to them and say, is this what you wanted? And then get their input from that.
Interesting.
I just want to give a shout out to, I think this was, in 7 years, the best I've seen DC-based advocacy organizations working with local affiliates and really forming a coalition that grew of advocates within our state. And that was a real plus for, I think, the quality of the plan and the general faith of the public in the plan. I thought Ed Trust Lillian did an amazing job. I thought the U.S. Chamber, the Urban League, NCLR, I mean, on and on, disability advocates, really an incredible job coordinating with our locals. And it was the first time that I'd really seen that happen. So the good thing is our base of advocates, I think, expanded and got broader and more bipartisan over the course of the ESSA process, largely thanks to their work.
Alice, any final thoughts?
Just on this same issue, I would say the Massachusetts Board of Education did similar outreach, traveled around the state, continues to have advisory groups of teachers, principals, and other stakeholders in developing, right now, we're in the process of developing new curriculum, new standards in history and social studies, and that has brought in all of the stakeholders, and they've been, I think, very engaged, and they've seen the impact that they have had, which I think, gives them some investment in success going forward. So I think it's never, you can never go wrong by involving all of the stakeholders as early as possible and continuing to go back to them.
Well, that's it for us. We're going to get the hook in a second. So please give our panelists a round of applause.